Hey everyone, and welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. I am so excited to be back and to be able to chat with you all. It's been a bit of a break since my last Pagan Happy Hour, so we have a lot to catch up on. Thank you all so much for choosing to join me. Today, we will be discussing the upcoming pagan holiday of the Summer Solstice. So definitely stay tuned for that. And if you are new here, welcome. Previously, I was doing Pagan Happy Hour every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. I took a little bit of a break. Now I'm back. But this is just a really great way for us to chat, to share resources, to talk about a variety of pagan topics. And of course, like today, to talk about the pagan holidays and to celebrate together. So I do love to have an interactive pagan happy hour. So I will be looking over here as we are going along. I'm going to be looking at your thoughts, your comments, and trying to bring in your ideas, questions, and thoughts into the conversation as well. So do please keep commenting as we go along. And there are two ways you can support Pagan Happy Hour in my channel if you would like to. The first way is through Super Chats, which is the $ button at the bottom of the chat box. Through that, you can donate any amount, and your comment or question will pop up really big for me in the chat, and I'll be sure to bring in your thought or question into the conversation. And the second way to support the channel is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below. And if you do choose to become a patron, you also gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is a great place to connect with and chat with fellow witches and pagans. So now let me cue that drink music. It is Friday after all. And why don't you in the comments tell me what you are drinking and where you are watching from tonight? Okay, got that drink music going. It's been a while since we heard that one, right? Okay, let me see here. Wow, we have some people watching today from Minnesota, from Belgium, Denver, Arizona, Wisconsin, Tennessee, let's see, Pennsylvania, Serbia, Sacramento, Illinois, Nevada, Indiana, Sweden, New Jersey, Germany, Texas. Let's see, Virginia. We have the Bay Area. We have California, Ecuador, Florida, Colombia, South Carolina, Australia, Scotland, and Japan. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me today and, of course, for sticking with me during my break. I'll, of course, have to give you a bit of an update to start, tell you what I've been doing since we last chatted. I took about, I think, like a month and a half break from YouTube. So it's been a busy few weeks, and I want to thank you guys again so much for tuning in today. So let me have another sip of my drink and we will jump into it. Okay, gotta turn off that drink music, and I thought I would just give you a quick life update before we start chatting about the upcoming solstice. So I've been a YouTuber for about, gosh, I feel like it's been 5 years. I think it might have been 5 years. Though I only started doing YouTube full time for probably the past 3 years. Though YouTube is definitely not the only thing I do. I actually have several different income sources and different activities that I do, but kind of being online pagan and witch kind of is my full-time gig, which is kind of wild when I think about it. But I did feel that I needed to take a break from YouTube for a couple reasons. The first reason is just a mental health break. If you've been watching YouTube for a while, you've probably heard from other YouTubers that the YouTube platform itself can be extremely stressful. And you might not realize this if you're just a casual watcher of YouTube, but for a creator and a creator like myself that's been creating videos for 5 years, every once in a while it just kind of gets to you and you need to take a break because the algorithm is really brutal. And if you don't take a break every once in a while, you start questioning why you're even doing all of this in the first place. You kind of get in these weird feedback loops where you feel like you're making videos to try and impress an algorithm. And then you forget that actually I just need to make stuff for myself and for the people that watch the videos. And YouTube really tries to force you into its algorithm system where it tries to force you to make certain types of content that will trend or be popular, which might not be authentic to who you are and what you care about. So as a creator, sometimes, you can just kind of get in these weird paths where you kind of lose your connection to what you're even talking about in the first place. And I kind of felt that happening a little bit. And especially as someone who creates videos and content about spirituality, it's kind of like a double situation because you obviously have a lot more to it than just YouTube as a business or something like that. It's so much more meaningful. So when you start thinking too much about and stressing about that algorithm or gaining followers and losing followers, that's when you need to just take a break, reconnect, remember why you are sharing this content, why you care deeply about paganism. And so that's basically what I did. I need to just not look at the numbers. The numbers just stress me out. So as I move forward and jump back into YouTube, I am going to take it a little bit slower, but I'm also going to try and force myself to not look at hate comments, to not focus on the numbers too much so that I can stay authentic in my content, even if whatever that is isn't trendy or popular. So I wanted to share that just because, I don't talk too much about the other side of Pagan Happy Hour in my YouTube channel, the whole business aspect. But yeah, sometimes it can get really overwhelming. So I see you guys in the comments. Thank you guys so much for supporting me and for supporting me through my little break that I had. I feel so much better now that I just took a little break. I feel reconnected back into my paganism and excited about creating content that I feel is more authentic. So that's what I plan to do in the future. Obviously, I was creating, authentic content too, but every once in a while I felt the pressure to like throw in something that I think could be popular or clickbaity. And that's just not healthy. That's not a good attitude to have. Also, I've been doing a lot of my other projects in this past month and a half. So while I do, love YouTube, I do enjoy making content. It's probably not my main business focus. I do lots of things. I teach tarot. I have several tarot students that I completely teach them from start to finish how to read tarot, how to even start their own tarot business if they would like. So that's one thing that I do on the side. I, of course, created my own tarot deck about a year and a half ago, I think, linked down below in case you're curious. It's called the Key Tarot. So I'm involved in that as well, selling, decks, working with printers, all of that kind of complicated stuff. And then the last thing I do is I help other people in this niche and kind of this pagan witchy spirituality niche. I help them start up and run their own businesses. So I do a lot of tech work, user experience design, web design, graphic design, marketing, and all of that kind of stuff through my business coaching classes. So I actually have a lot going on. And that was another reason I had to take a break. I just frankly overscheduled myself. It can happen to the best of us. So I just had too many clients, too many lessons, and I had to let YouTube take a bit of a break. But I think that will be slowing down a bit. I might even be able to add on an extra tarot student or business client in a month or so. So I'll keep you updated on that. But basically, that's what I've been up to lately. So I just wanted to share that with you all, get it all out there. And next, we're going to start shifting and talking a bit about the summer solstice, guys. How exciting is this? We have a pagan holiday coming up. If you've been following me for a while, you know I am all about those pagan holidays. I love to celebrate. So we're going to be talking about that. But before we do, let me have a sip of my drink. Let me check your comments, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about the solstice. Let's see. Awesome. Well, I see you guys commenting now. Thank you guys so much again for all your support. It seems like you're on my side here in terms of, wanting to create authentic content and to be authentic here online. So I really appreciate that. And I do apologize if you hear some noise in the background. My neighbor decided that 6 o'clock would be a good time to uh, I think use a weed whacker or a leaf blower, even though it's 97 degrees outside. So can't help that, when you're live, what happens, happens. But I apologize if you hear that background noise. So let's start talking about the solstice. Now, this is a holiday that's a bit tricky for us pagans. I'm going to get into that. But on the one hand, the general symbology of the holiday is pretty easy to understand, right? This is the longest day of the year. This is when the time between sunrise and sunset is at its longest, of course, within the northern hemisphere. The date of the solstice does change a bit every year. This year it is on Tuesday, the 21st. So if you haven't planned anything yet, I got you. You got a few days. You can take what we discussed today and work it into a plan of activities or ideas for the upcoming solstice. But unfortunately, we don't really know that much about how our pagan ancestors celebrated the solstice. We do know that it's likely they did celebrate the solstice. And we know this from the fact that a lot of stone circles that are created in the UK, a lot of them are oriented towards the solstices. So it's very likely that people were tracking the movements of the celestial sphere. They were tracking day length, obviously for agricultural purposes, but likely also for religious and spiritual purposes. So it's highly likely that people have been celebrating the winter and the summer solstice for millennia, really. But we don't have any written material specifically about how people celebrated the solstice. We do have folklore. Folklore is kind of a tricky thing from a archaeological or a scientific perspective because it's basically like the game telephone, right? If you remember when you were a kid, just bits of knowledge, bits of sacred wisdom passed down from person to person to person over thousands of years. So when we think about how we celebrate the summer solstice, we can really only rely on folklore here, unless you know something I don't. If you do have any interesting historical documentation of how our pagan ancestors did celebrate the solstice, let me know, because I am by no means an expert. I do not have a PhD in the subject. So it's definitely possible I've missed something, but I haven't really found anything myself that can really indicate a ritual routine or a type of offering that is designed specifically to be done at the summer solstice. Um, let's see. Oh, I see some interesting comments here and some good theories. Graves in the comments mentions that Lori Cabot commented that field workers would be getting little sleep during the time of the solstice since they would wake up with the sun. So they would be considered sleep deprived at this point of the year and thus would be more able to enter an altered state. That's a really interesting theory. And I think it's always good to think about how people would be interacting with the agricultural season because so much of our ancient pagan practices, and as we today try to reconstruct them, we are all about trying to tap back into that seasonality of the wheel of the year and the agricultural cycle. So, envisioning how people dealt with the agricultural seasonality can kind of help us get into that mindset and perhaps understand a bit better how our pagans ancestors would have celebrated. Oh, we have a super chat from Brand Whitlock. Thank you so much. Cheers. He says, I'm glad you're back and definitely stay true to yourself. It's the best version of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate this super chat. Yeah, so what we are relying on here, it being folklore, it does leave us a lot of opportunities as modern pagans to kind of formulate and create the summer solstice activities that we want. So, we're going to get into some ways that you can celebrate the solstice, though, like I said, because we don't really have any written material or information here, there is a lot of wiggle room to kind of come up with your own rituals, your own ideas, your own traditions when it comes to the solstice. Oh, we have another super chat here from Wilding Up North. Thank you so much. That says, I plan on burning my Yule tree as an offering to the Landvitir or the land spirits. That is a great idea. And I do know that that is a significant part of folklore is the bonfire in general. We know that bonfires are a huge part of the vast majority of pagan holidays. Earlier, we did a pagan happy hour where we talked a lot about Beltane. Beltane, in particular, or May Day, is huge with the bonfires. But really, you can think about bonfires being a tradition you can do for every single pagan holiday. So, doing something like chopping up your Yule tree at Yule and then burning those logs on the summer solstice really creates this beautiful symmetry between the longest and the shortest day of the year. So I love that concept. And I hope to do that myself actually, not this year, but next year, because I do have four small old Victorian fireplaces in this house that I bought about 6 months ago. I'm planning on getting them up and working this fall and then purchasing, a proper real tree this Yule season. So I'll actually have wood that then I can burn for the following summer solstice. So that is on my list of activities for next year. Oh, and we have a super chat from Daka that says folklore and tradition have to come from somewhere. Yes, and that's a good point. We are quick to devalue folklore in our modern day. And in part, that's probably because the vast majority of our lives are data and science focused and not as much focused around the human element. We don't value human stories, human emotions, human feelings as much as we value tangible data and assets in the modern world. And I think back in the day, it wasn't quite like that. Obviously, they didn't live in such a technological era where you had such efficient tracking and um, scientific understanding of the universe. So when someone told you that this is how it was done, you kind of believed them and you took them at their word. Your word probably meant a lot more back in the day. So that's a good point. And maybe one of the things that we do as modern pagans, part of that is kind of deprogramming our modern sensibilities to tap back in to believing in the oral tradition, in the storytellers of history, and to pass on that way, that lens of interpreting our lives. So I think there's a lot of depth there that you just kind of brought up. Um, Oh, and we have a super chat here from Jakara. Thank you so much. That says, observing the seasons is one of my favorite elements of paganism. And even if the heat isn't my favorite, I think it's really important to connect with every season in some way. Yes, definitely agree. One of the best things we can do as modern pagans is reconnect ourselves with the wheel of the year. While the vast majority of society is living in a linear tradition, we pagans were a bit weird. We're trying to figure out how to live in a cycle tradition, in the wheel of the year, in noticing those subtle changes that occur with the seasons, within our own lives. Our lives themselves are part of this wheel. So it's a huge mindset shift that really differentiates how pagans conceptualize both the earth and our lives and history compared to how, say, people who were raised in a monotheistic tradition, like Christianity, for example, where you tend to view your life in a more linear sense, right? Birth, death, heaven, or hell, who knows? But from a pagan sense, we're looking at everything in the cyclical, right? We're looking at plants in terms of their birth, death, regrowth with the new spring. We're looking at our human anatomy, our feminine cycles. We're looking at our, things like pregnancies, sexy time, all of that kind of stuff in a cyclical fashion. And we also look at our lives usually in a cyclical fashion as well as birth, death, and then rebirth in some form, differs depending on your beliefs and tradition. But you guys are bringing up some great thoughts and great ideas here. Thank you guys so much. Let me see. And of course, too, this time of the solstice is a really great time of harvest as well. We're not quite in the harvest season entirely. There are three pagan holidays that are specifically associated with harvest, and that's going to be our next pagan holiday, Lunasa, which is going to be in early August. And then we go into autumn equinox, which is the balance point between daylight and nighttime. And then finally, Samhain. Those were the three traditional harvest festivals. But really, here at Summer Solstice, this is the time when you're probably most active in the garden if you are a gardener. And for me, this is my first year really trying hard at my garden. Um, this is the first year I've owned a home. So I have created garden beds, I have tomatoes, I have peppers. By this point in the heat, anything other than tomatoes, peppers, and herbs has mostly failed or bolted. I'm going to get better at my timing. But it is really exciting to be out in the garden every day at this season, during solstice season, because I know that when I hit those next three pagan holidays, I can really make them truly about those harvest energy, that harvest vibes. So that's a big way that I just celebrate midsummer or summer solstice, Litha. I just really try and focus on the garden. What am I growing right now? How can I use my time and my energy to cultivate these plants so that I do ensure that harvest coming up down the road? Okay, let me check your thoughts here. Let's see. Winter Oak says, for me, while summer is my least favorite season, it is the time of year I feel closest to the element of water because I swim a lot in the lake and usually visit the ocean. That's another kind of great way to start thinking about these pagan holidays and the wheel of the year is asking yourself, what element do I connect with most at different points on the wheel of the year? So it can be almost counterintuitive in some ways because when I think of summer solstice, especially here down in the South, it is very hot outside. But probably like you in the comments, I don't really associate fire with this time of year, even though I am experiencing the heat. I associate fire more with either Beltane or maybe the autumn equinox, because that's really when like bonfire season is happening. Water is definitely an element that I think a lot of people do tend to connect with at this time of year because we are physically interacting usually with the element of water. I myself live close to the beach, so of course I'm doing more beach visits around the time of the solstice. I grew up by a lake in upstate New York, and of course I'd be visiting the lake. So that is a really great kind of thought experiment for you all to have and thinking about for the summer solstice which of the traditional alchemical elements, earth, air, fire, water, do you feel connected with the most, and why would that be? So yeah, that's a great point to make. I really love that idea, and it's something I should definitely think about as we proceed through the wheel of the year, which of those elements I'm kind of vibing with the most. Let's see, what else do we have? Um, I see Drakara mentioning watering the garden. That's another kind of way that the element of water really kind of dominates this summer solstice season because me too. Feel like I'm constantly watering everything. So we're using a lot of water here at this season. So many good thoughts and ideas coming in through the comments. Thank you guys so much. And before we jump into a few other ways to celebrate this summer solstice holiday and season, I did want to briefly mention the name Litha. So you might have heard that term before. A lot of people, when they are new to paganism, often they will start out in the Wiccan tradition. At least that's how I kind of found paganism and started out. And there are different names for the holidays. So, Litha, if you've heard that term, that is an Old English Anglo Saxon term that basically means the months roughly corresponding to June and July. So, they're kind of like old Anglo Saxon terms for June and July. So if you're wondering where that name comes from, there you go. Though for me personally, I pretty much just refer to it as summer solstice or even midsummer. If you do follow a Norse pagan tradition, or if you're familiar with Scandinavia, the summer solstice is a pretty big deal there. And they do call it midsummer. In particular, it's such a huge deal because since they're so far north, the hours of daylight that they experience is insane. It's like 23 hours or 24 hours of daylight, depending on how far up north you are. Um, I highly recommend if you are a horror fan, checking out the movie Midsummer. You could even make it a little midsummer tradition. While the movie doesn't paint pagan midsummer ceremonies in a good light, I am a horror fan and I do really love that movie. So I recommend checking it out if you have not seen it yet. It's a really wild one. There's a lot of kind of weird rune and Norse magic lore that you might pick up on that your average viewer might not notice. So definitely check out Midsummer, but it's a wild one. um, Yeah. So I see you guys mentioning about Midsummer is that they do the May Queen and the May Pole. Yes. So it's a bit different depending on the country, the origin of the tradition. So I do believe that in the UK, the concept of May Queen, May Pole is more Beltane, which falls on May 1st. But in Scandinavia, because it's definitely not warm yet. They kind of transfer a lot of that kind of tradition and symbolism to midsummer, the summer solstice. So it does change a bit depending on what kind of country's tradition and folklore you're looking at when these certain things are celebrated. That's why I find it sometimes kind of really helpful to not think of the pagan holidays as one particular day, but as a season. So thinking of it like Beltane season starts blending into the next season, which here is solstice season. And then as we progress, getting closer to August, we're going to start transitioning into Lughnasadh season and then eventually transitioning into equinox season. So I kind of think of it as solstice celebrations don't have to occur on the specific day of the solstice. They're more mindsets, activities, traditions that you can incorporate into your life throughout, kind of a month. So that's kind of how I tend to look at it. And you can even modify it a bit depending on your climate. Um, Here in the South, it gets hot pretty quickly. So I'm almost already feeling those Lughnasadh vibes, even though I'm only at midsummer time. And Beltane season for me probably starts quite a bit earlier, more in late March, April than it might for you. So we use these traditional dates as a guideline, but really you can change them up based on your location and your climate. Because, of course, these dates and activities are mostly based on a system that comes from the UK. And obviously, not everyone has the same climate as the UK. So do feel free to play around a bit with the Wheel of the Year because ultimately, the purpose of the Wheel of the Year is to help us connect to the cycle of the seasons where we live. So, celebrating the Wheel of the Year in Phoenix, Arizona should look quite a bit different than celebrating the Wheel of the Year in Bangor, Maine, or something like that, right? So I do want to make sure you guys know that even though we celebrate at certain times in general, um, it is very malleable, it is flexible, and as individual pagan practitioners, we have the ability to play around with the Wheel of the Year so that it best fits our own connections to the natural world. So let me see what you guys have to say. Hmm. Craig has a good idea in the comments saying, I love to watch Shakespeare's Midsummer or a Midsummer Night or read it during this time of year. I love that idea. Um, uh, Puck, of course, is like super pagan in Midsummer Night. A lot of pagan symbolism there. In a similar way, I actually read Christmas Carol every year at Yule time. And even though Christmas Carol, it has Christmas in the word, there's a lot of interesting pagan elements in Christmas Carol if you pay close enough attention, especially Ghost of Christmas Present. I've talked about that before in some of my Yule videos. You can check it out if you're interested. But yes, highly recommend checking out Midsummer Night's Dream in book form, film form, play form. That's another fun way to kind of celebrate this time of year. So let's see. And there is, of course, such a neat connection, right, between summer solstice and winter solstice, right? These are the two extremes in the wheel of the year. So as we are thinking about the summer solstice, it is that peak of summer. How can you envision summer energy to its height? Just as in winter solstice, that's the peak of winter. How do you envision that winter energy in a really powerful way? So there's this kind of nice duality between these two holidays, just as how there is a beautiful duality between the spring equinox of Ostara and the autumn equinox, sometimes called Mabon. So always kind of thinking about those dualities within the wheel of the year. And then, of course, you have the other four, which are the traditional Irish festivals, all making up the wheel of the year. And then if you're like me, you throw in some random holidays, coming from ancient Rome and things like that along the way. So let's see. So I do want to mention also that one of the best ways to celebrate the summer solstice is to do a bit of decorating when it comes to either your home or your altar. Here right now, I have 4 fireplaces and 4 fireplace mantles. So that tends to be where I do the majority of my decorating, or really I think of them as my altar spaces in this house, in part because I really like hearth magic, and I think that there are so many fascinating traditions involving the hearth in our homes. I actually learned a neat fact that I wanted to share with you recently. This is a fact about the American South. So, if a home were to burn down, fall apart, any catastrophe, if it happens to your house, it's believed in the South that you never demolish the fireplace, you leave it. You keep it sturdy and steady because that is where the spirits reside. So I was visiting a winery recently in North Carolina, and they had an old, just random fireplace in the middle of the woods. And that's because people don't tear those down in the South. They obviously believe in ghosts here and spirits here, probably a lot more than other areas of America. So I do like that tradition, and I'm a big fan of hearth magic. So I tend to use my fireplace mantles as good altar spaces, though really any flat surface will do. And if you are worried about other people finding out about your pagan beliefs, which I know is a big issue for people that might not be living alone, or they're still living with their parents or something like that, there's a lot you can put on your altar that's not going to give any indication that you're a pagan or a witch or anything like that. One of my favorite things to put on an altar is natural materials. So that means going outside and seeing what's blooming in your area at this time of year. Go ahead, even if it's not flowers, it could just be greenery. Getting some of that and putting it in a vase on your altar, no one's going to know. That is a great way to celebrate the season, to take that moment to recognize what actually is growing around me at this time of year. And you can even take it a step further, get one of those plant identification apps, and figure out what actually is growing where you live at this time of year. So you start to build up that knowledge of the land spirits, of the space around you. I see someone mentioning sunflowers in the comments. Of course, sunflowers are a classic flower for the solstice. So if you do happen to have any sunflowers near you, that's a great flower to put on your altar. Or, if you don't have any flowers nearby and you want flowers, you can, of course, go buy them too. I know Trader Joe's actually has pretty cheap flowers if you have one nearby. So yeah, it's definitely just all about connecting with what you have where you live. Um, oh, I see a good question from Cassandra, um, asking if you should be celebrating Yule or summer solstice if you live in the southern hemisphere. So this is a really good question, and I actually switch the wheel of the year. So if you are in the southern hemisphere, I would not be celebrating summer solstice right now. I would be celebrating Yule or winter solstice. For me, even though the vast majority of content being produced about paganism is by people living in the northern hemisphere, ultimately, I think establishing a pagan practice is all about connecting with the natural world and the seasons where you currently are. So if you are in the southern hemisphere, I would switch it. So I would actually turn off this pagan happy hour and go find one of my Yule pagan happy hours and watch that to get you all psyched up for Yule season. So that's how I tend to view it. I know some pagans in the southern hemisphere do still work with the more European version of the Wheel of the Year, but for me, I tend to look not at just the historical aspect, but look at more as in a tangible way. What is the earth doing where you live? That's what we should be noticing and respecting as pagans. So, great question. And I hope I was able to clear that up for you. Let's see. Warren has a good comment that says, I would love to put natural things on my altar, but it's kind of hard when you live in an apartment complex and in the city. Warren, no excuses. I lived in Chicago for 6 years, and then I moved to Dallas for a year, and now I'm here in Savannah. And I was sneaky. I'm not gonna lie. I would go to public parks and with my little scissors and do a little snip snip on those little public park trees, just a couple branches, wasn't harming no one. But there are always ways to find natural materials, regardless of where you live. So no excuses. Even if you live in the city, there are ways to even just buy some flowers or something like that. Because I lived as a city pagan for a decade, and I'm still a city pagan. I live in the heart of Savannah. So even though it's a bit more calm than when I lived in Chicago or Dallas, it is still definitely in the heart of a city. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Caitlin is mentioning in the comments that in Minnesota, we call it midsummer. That makes sense because Minnesota has the highest concentration of Scandinavian immigrants, and the Scandinavians are the pros at celebrating midsummer. One of my goals is to eventually travel to Scandinavia and attend a midsummer celebration. I did go to Denmark and Sweden, I think right before the pandemic started. It was 2019. But I got to go back and I got to go during a pagan holiday because that would be very epic. So let's see here. Another thing that you can add on your altar is a form of water. Earlier, we were talking about how so many of us really feel connected to the element of water at this time in the wheel of the year. So, water is always a good thing to have on your altar. And it's another thing that people probably won't notice or question. You can either choose water from a natural stream or lake or ocean, or one of the fun things I like now that I live in the South is we have thunderstorms constantly, almost every day in the afternoon and evenings at this time of year. So gathering some storm water can be really fun, and you can even use that water as the water in your vase for your solstice flowers, or you could just put it in a bowl. If you live by the ocean, you could also collect some seashells in there. So, really, just trying to connect with that water element at this time of year. It can kind of temper the heat in some way, too, kind of bringing balance um, to those elements, the heat of the summer and the coolness of the water. So, oh, and we have a super chat from Graves. Thank you so much. That says the Fae are very active at this time of year. Yeah, definitely. So I really like to incorporate the Fae in my garden. So when I plant in the garden, when I create little cozy little flower nooks, I'm always thinking about the Fae. And another thing too, when you look at Irish folklore, they especially were all about leaving offerings for the Fae by the fire at the fireplace mantle. So if you do work with the Fae in any way, leaving a bit of mead or honey or milk as a small offering on a mantle or out in your garden is a great way to appreciate the Fae and these spirits. Let's see. Rachel has a super chat that says, Happy solstice to everyone, and so happy that Pagan Happy Hour is back. I hope the break recharged you. Thank you so much. Yes, I feel so much better just having that little bit of a break. I feel so excited and re energized to chat with you all about these pagan activities and pagan holidays. So we talked about flowers, natural materials, and water for your altar. An activity that you can do that's really easy is waking up a little extra early to watch the sunrise on the solstice, or if you're not a morning person, I understand not everyone is, at least staying up until the sun sets on the solstice. Because the key concept of the solstice is we are recognizing that this is the longest day of the year. Early, we were talking about what it might have been like for our pagan ancestors as they were approaching the agricultural season. This would have been an exhausting day, right? Because people used to wake up with the sunrise and go to bed at shortly after the sunset, right? So if you imagine working that day, it would be ultimately exhausting. You don't have to do that now as a modern day pagan, but it's good to think about using this solstice, that sun time, productively. Even starting to rewire our brain a bit. How can we turn away from our technological morning alarms and try to actually wake and sleep with the cycle of the sun? Easier said than done on work days, I understand, but on weekend days, maybe you turn off that alarm. Maybe you open the curtains so that when the sun rises, it does actually work with your circadian rhythms and you do wake up, or go to bed a little bit early when the sun actually does set. So, trying to retrain our brains to focus less on technology notifications and more on natural notifications of time can be a good way to kind of retrain ourselves to tap back into a natural perspective of living. So yeah, definitely either watching that sunrise or watching that sunset. If you're extra ambitious, watching both. That is a wonderful, simple way to celebrate the solstice. Oh, and I see I have a super chat from Wednesday. Thank you so much. Appreciate your support. Let me see. Oh, a couple things you can do too. So there are some traditional herbs you can gather around this time. This is, of course, dependent on where you live. Because the vast amount of written information and folklore we have is from Europe and especially Northern Europe. It's not going to apply to everyone. But I did want to mention that two traditional herbs to gather at this time of year. We have mistletoe, which is an odd one, right? But mistletoe is that connecting line between the summer solstice and the winter solstice. Of course, mistletoe at this time of year will not have berries, it'll just be greenery. We do have at least some folkloric evidence that mistletoe was gathered during both the summer solstice and the winter solstice. So even though we kind of mostly just associate mistletoe with Yule, it's actually this kind of great herb that or plant that kind of connects the two solstices. So gathering some mistletoe, if you have any, if you can find any, obviously there won't be berries. Um, Putting that on your altar is a great traditional thing to do. Also, I believe if you find it growing on an oak tree, it's extra special, as the oak trees in particular were known by the Druids to be extra powerful and potent as these trees that connected the spiritual realm and the human realm. And we have another super chat from Wednesday. Thank you so much. That says, "I missed your content. Welcome back and happy solstice." Thank you so much. So mistletoe, if you happen to see some, go ahead and gather that for your altar. The other good one to gather is St. John's wort. Now, this is a super witchy herb. Here in the South, it is no longer growing by midsummer because it's too hot. But if you live in a bit of a more northern climate, you might have some St. John's wort that is ready to harvest at solstice. One of the exciting plans I have for my garden, as I'm establishing it, I'm just obviously starting out. I've only been in this house for like 6 months, is really working on my herbs and growing a lot of those traditional pagan and witchy herbs to the best of my abilities. Even though here I live in a really warm climate, we'll see how it goes. But yes, St. John's wort should be in full bloom now if you do happen to live in the northern hemisphere above the sun belt. And St. John's wort, traditionally you would hang it above doorways or over your bed or over your fireplace mantle. It's usually used as a protection herb or a protection charm. If you do happen to have a fire or a bonfire, you can also throw it into the fire as a little bit of a protection spell. So those are two herbs, mistletoe and St. John's wort, to be looking at, as they do definitely make an appearance in folklore. If you do know of other herbs that are traditionally and folklorically, I don't know if that's a word, associated with the summer solstice, let me know in the comments, because I am always looking for a fun folklore rabbit hole to go down. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's see. I see in the comments Bellatrix mentioning rosemary is great for protection. Yes, rosemary is a wonderful herb for protection and a wonderful herb just for all purposes. Culinary, it smells good. You can use it in skincare products. I have a rosemary bush that I brought all the way from when I lived in Dallas like a year and a half ago. It's struggling, but I'm hoping it's going to survive. Rosemary is another good one, and of course, it's doing probably very well at this time of year if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. I see in the comments, fantastic. Beck has a good warning about consuming St. John's wort. Yes, I don't recommend consuming it unless you really know what you're doing. It's better used as a decorative herb or an herb to throw into the fire or to, place on your altar. So always make sure you are looking into the properties of any herbs you are using. I recommend to, if you are new to herb growing, Rosemary Gladstar is a excellent author on herbalism that she was actually recommended to me from someone on my Discord community, which was really fun. And I bought one of her books, which is like 33 traditional herbs to grow if you're new with herb lore. And I've been loving that book. I've been doing a lot of planning for my own personal garden. I also have the New American Herbal Guide, which is another good book. If you just kind of want an encyclopedia style book about different herbs, how to grow them, herb lore, things like that. So many good resources out there for growing herbs. And for me, as a nerd when it comes to all of this, I love looking into weird folkloric symbolism of the herbs, the history of the herbs, how they were used in different centuries by different spiritual communities and witches and things like that. So let's see. Oh, a super chat from Rusty. Thank you very much. Let's see another comment from Wednesday about calendula and how wonderful it is for skincare and as a antibiotic and anti-inflammatory. Yes, calendula is such a wonderful multi-purpose herb. So if you do grow that, this would be a great time to harvest calendula and actually make like a calendula salve. That would be such a wonderful midsummer day activity. So let's see here. Another thing too that probably you can't do every year, and it's dependent on where you live, but cicadas, which is an insect very much tied towards summer and the midsummer season. Um, Traditionally, they have been used in a lot of spellcraft and hoodoo and things like that, especially here in the South. I think cicadas, their life cycle is it what like they appear every 7 years, 9 years, something like that. So they don't come out every year. But in a year when there are cicadas, there is a lot of traditional folklore about taking the insect, drying it out, or using their shedded skins. This is kind of a gross one, but stay with me. And there are a lot of old spells you can look up that feature cicada skins, dead cicadas. It's kind of wild. But in general, from a witchy perspective, the cicada skins represent the kind of the shell of the body without the astral self. So a lot of people traditionally in the South would make these charm bags or these gree bags, as they're called. I named my cat Gree. I have two of them. I have Lilybell and Gree, so I named one of my cats after these types of spell bags. You wear them around your neck, usually, and you can put different herbs, materials in them. And in the summer, you could put a cicada skin in a gree bag, wear it around your neck, and use that to attempt some astral travel. As kind of the skin of the cicada represents that kind of empty shell of the body as your spirit self leaves. So if you are interested in astral travel, or from another witchy perspective, you could call it hedge riding, things like that, hedge crossing. There's a lot of interesting terminology when it comes to astral travel. I have a whole video that I did about journeying. You can check that out if you're interested. So that could be an interesting material to use if you are a bit brave and ambitious and not super spooked out by bugs. So there's a lot of kind of neat stuff out there. I see that someone else mentions locust shells. Yes, if you are witchy, a lot of traditional witchcraft involves kind of gross stuff like this. You kind of have to be comfortable with bones and bugs and all of that. At least if you're trying to work with some of the traditional spell crafting. Let's see. Um, oh, and another thing I wanted to mention too is honey. And honey is something that I use pretty often, and it's pretty easy to use for a variety of different pagan purposes. But in general, by the time of midsummer, um, any beehive is pretty much filled with honey. At this point, the bees have probably gathered enough nectar where they're producing a lot of honey. So traditionally, at least in from what we know in northern climates in the northern hemisphere, this would be a time that people would gather, harvest honey, or make mead. So, if you are looking for an offering to give, whether that be to a particular deity, whether that be to the fae, or the land spirits, or an ancestor, anything like that, honey or mead might be a good offering that kind of ties in well to the tradition. And it's interesting, kind of, you might not be familiar, but here in Savannah in particular, we're pretty famous for honey. We have a lot of honey in this area, and we have a lot of rare varieties of honey you can't get anywhere. One that's pretty famous is called Tupelo honey. It only grows or grows, it only is produced by bees in southern Georgia and northern Florida, so you can't really get it anywhere else. So we have some shops around here, like Savannah Bee Company, that sell unusual types of honey, unusual types of mead. So mead is a really great offering item. And this is another great connecting point between the summer and the winter solstice, as mead is, of course, another great offering for Yule. The summer solstice and the winter solstice in general tend to have a lot of that Norse pagan influence, which makes sense, to be incorporating mead here for these two holidays. So, if you do have any honey that's a natural honey that can be used to either create your own mead or to just straight up give honey or mead as an offering. Of course, I love trying to incorporate local stuff. So if you are able to find any locally produced mead, that's a great way to kind of just incorporate the land vitier, the land spirits into your offering. When it comes to offerings in general, you can see I've plenty of altar tours and offering videos. I tend to keep it pretty simple. I usually offer usually some type of beverage or a natural food item. If I'm doing it inside, I usually put it like on an altar, leave it there for a few days, and then pour it outside afterwards. If it's a food item, I will put it outside, and I always do something that's biodegradable, like a fruit or a vegetable of some kind. So lots of good options there. And wow, this hour flew by. This was such a wonderful chat. I feel very refreshed and happy to be back chatting with you all today. I do want to, of course, wish you a wonderful summer solstice. Keep me updated. Let me know how you guys end up celebrating this holiday. I do hope you learned something today or that you got a bit of inspiration on how to celebrate this upcoming holiday. If you are new here and not yet subscribed, I do, of course, encourage you to subscribe. And yeah, I want to thank you guys so much. I'll see you soon. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful solstice. Talk to you later. Bye.